Okay, well, welcome to tonight's event. We are, it's wonderful to be able to welcome the Sacred Heart Community Service SURJers who are here. But as people continue to trickle in, feel free to help yourselves to some tea, water, snacks. If you need to go to the restroom, it's just behind, you kind of walk around. There's a building over there with two it's the public restroom, and you have to push the door really hard for it to open. So just so you know, if you need to sneak out and go to the restroom. But as we get started and more people trickle in, I'd like to welcome our sort of first presenter facilitator for the evening, David Ball of the SCU Law School, to get us started on incarceration and helping us think about care first, jail last. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. You know, I think one thing that might, I'd like us all just to sort of stop and consider is the fact that maybe 4 miles away from here right now, there are hundreds of people in the Santa Clara County Jail in downtown San Jose. But more than that, you know, sort of throughout Santa Clara County, there are family members, friends, you know, other folks who are connected to the people who are in jail right now. And I say that because I think it's really important for us to really think about this notion of community. You know, when we talk about public safety, like who counts as part of the public and what are our actions doing to sort of make us safe and not safe? This was actually the subject of an amicus brief I wrote for a case called In re Humphrey when it was before the California Supreme Court, that was all about pretrial release. And I know that some folks are going to talk a lot more about pretrial release, but you know, we are connected. And I think that that's just something I want us to sort of bear in mind, right? There are human beings. There are obviously human beings on sort of some of the other side of what got people in jail in the first place, right? But there is, you know, I feel like my notion of humanity is capacious enough to sort of hold all of that in one place. And I don't feel like we necessarily do a good job of that. So I do have a couple of, you know, things that I wanted to say that I think would be helpful to sort of frame the discussion, but I do want to leave plenty of time for questions. And I want to start out with the first question, which is, why is this the question we're asking about a jail, right? Why do we have to have a jail? Why is having a jail or a new jail or an up-to-date jail a problem that we need to address now, when we can wait to address homelessness or childhood poverty or healthcare or mental health care in schools, environmental remediation, all of these other things? Those are problems, but there isn't this agenda item that says we're going to spend $500 million building a building and many more millions of dollars staffing that, et cetera, right? So I think that that's one place that I would like to start with, because those problems that I mentioned exist in Santa Clara County. And budgets, you know, are moral choices, are moral documents. They involve choices that we make. And so what we value and what we don't, who counts and who doesn't. And that's why I do want us to sort of hold in our minds, like, people who are involved in the system, they're people. They were children, you know, their lives are very different than ours, but their lives are just as vivid to them as ours are to us. So I want to talk briefly about 3 things. Like, so first, how we treat spending on criminal law. And I think that that is an important part of the discussion. And then second, what the evidence is for whether incarceration works. I've been the co-chair of the American Bar Association Corrections Committee for 12 years now. I've worked a lot on policy issues, and I've been a professor at Santa Clara for a long time, but so I have some thoughts about that. And then the last thing would be sort of what I would see as being valuable or good ways of thinking about that. The question of what, if not jails, then what? So briefly, I just want to talk about money. So this is going to focus on prisons, but it is a form of incarceration. And I'm not going to spoil the question about the difference between prisons and jails, although that is a question that I always ask my students and get mad when they fail to get the answer right after a couple of months of my class. So in 1980, we started a jail building program where we built 20 prisons in 21 years. And this was during a time of so-called fiscal conservatism, where we couldn't spend money on social welfare programs. And how we funded that, while at the same time talking about a balanced budget, is we issued bonds, revenue bonds for infrastructural improvements. This makes sense if you're building a road and you can count on the economic activity that it generates, increasing tax revenues so that we can pay off those bonds, or if we educate our population and then people go on to earn more money, or all those sorts of generative things. But prisons are not generative of any kind of sustainable economic activity. The main economic activity that comes from building prisons, and this will go for jails as well, but there is a difference, is in the construction part of it. But once you build a prison or any kind of carceral facility, you can't reuse it for anything. Not even the bleakest high school. My brother went to a high school in Atlanta that had literally no windows in it. Maybe that could have been a jail. I mean, insert your symbolism there, right? But mostly you can't reuse the buildings for anything. And if you do it on the promise of, a local investment boom, people don't want to go to Soledad because there's a prison there. People don't want to go to, any of the places where we have large prisons. They're not good revenue drivers. And so, but we have been sold this bill of goods that we didn't need to pay for prisons. We could borrow for prisons because those were investments. But literally, we didn't use, that's the workaround we use for prisons, but we didn't use that for other things. Right? We didn't say, it's much, much harder to get a bond measure passed for a school, right? Or for a park, even though parks actually do tend to reduce crime. And so I want us to think about this, right? Like, what is it when people say we can't or we must do things, there's not enough money for that. We have billionaires in this county. There is money, there's just not political will. We can't say that we have to spend money on a jail. We don't have to spend money on a jail. We can be told that we do and we can choose to, but we don't have to, right? There are other choices that we can make. So don't we need jails because of crime, right? And this is where I want to say that there are public problems that are not criminal, and there are criminal problems that are not public problems, okay? People who work in Amazon warehouses can't go to the bathroom and they don't make any money. People who work at Walmart typically have to be on government assistance. That's legal. The Walton family, they're all billionaires. Jeff Bezos is a billionaire. The legal system ensures that that can happen, but I don't think that's just. And I don't feel bad saying that because we're at a Catholic institution right now and we're supposed to care about the poor. Right? So I'm not saying that Jeff Bezos is committing crimes, but I'm also saying that's not just. The criminal law doesn't cover any of that, but there are human needs. And we'll often hear that there are human needs for the victims of crime. We'll have to ask ourselves, and again, I'm going to leave room for Q&A, whether or not incarceration actually does heal victims, or whether or not it's just claimed on behalf of victims. Interesting case from Alameda County. I'll just go ahead and tell you, interesting case from Alameda County about 8 years ago, a person whose parents were both killed, his parents were death penalty abolitionists. And he said, if you are actually speaking on behalf of my parents, do not seek the death penalty because they wouldn't want it. But the DA sought it anyway, right? So victims are one of those things where it's convenient when they agree with what law enforcement wants to do. And if it's inconvenient, that doesn't matter. We're really talking about the public. So before we even get to jail as a solution for crime, or we would need to talk about what crimes are and whether or not crime covers everything. Is public urination because you don't have a house, is that something that is really a criminal problem, or is that an economic problem? Right? And those are crimes. You're not allowed to publicly urinate, but that raises the question of why do we think people are doing what they're doing? And why do we think going to jail will help solve that problem, right? When I'm in conflict with someone on my good days, I try to figure out why we are in conflict, what I did to them, what they're seeking to do when they're in conflict with me. So if our theory is that people resort to property crimes, it might be because they are poor, and that might be because of individual reasons, which we could address, and it might be because of structural reasons that society needs to address. But we have to figure out why someone is doing something that we deem criminal before we could possibly claim that jail is actually going to help make them better. So let's say that we thought it was an individual problem, that somebody didn't have the life skills in order to hold down a job. Is jail the place that we want to do that for them? If we really think that people resort to crime because they don't have the life skills to get a job, then why don't we invest in schools so that we prevent the crime from happening in the first place? Why are we giving people what they need to survive or thrive in society only after they enter the jail walls? And we don't actually do much for people when they're in jail. The evidence, right? As an academic, I want to go where the evidence goes. There is surprisingly little evidence on the efficacy of prison. That is, whether it works at all for anything. You all know about the war on drugs. Did anyone go to California? Did anyone graduate from a California high school in the last 10 years? I mean, sure, someone did, right? Okay, you can raise your hand. Right? The war on drugs meant that there was no pot in your high school, I assume, right? It totally worked, right? So, you know, kids like, so did it work? I don't think so, not even from an incapacitation viewpoint. Is that actually a problem? Yeah, I don't think the kids should be using that, but is that the best way of approaching that, right? Is to incarcerate people. There's very little evidence that that works. Even if it does work, is it the most effective way for us to address those problems? And so when we start talking about, you know, whether or not we should build a jail, just remember this: we incarcerate more people in this country than any other society has at any point in human history. So either we know something that no other human beings ever have, or we better have great evidence that we're actually right and all of them are wrong. And even asking that question about whether or not law enforcement and the criminal legal system works is not something that anyone ever asks. Okay? So you should say, how will we know that the jail will have worked? What are the outcomes that you want? And I remember seeing a criminologist at Rutgers who was talking, named James Austin. Last 40 years of crime, maybe 5 years ago. You have rises and falls in the rates of crime. And when crime goes up, we need more prisons and jails. When crime goes down, prisons and jails are working, right? So 8-year periods of rising and falling crime. But of course, the other way of looking at that is when crime goes up, prisons and jails aren't working. And when crime goes down, we don't need prisons and jails. Now, that is an equally legitimate way of reading the data. And so I would like to throw it out to somebody that I think the presumption is that unless somebody proves to me that every other person who ever lived in every society is dumb or is missing something, that you're gonna have to prove to me that what we do is necessary. And not only necessary, but we have to increase it, right? You've seen their ballot initiatives to say, like, let's roll back the clock, blah, 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 all these, who will think of the children, et cetera, sort of ballot initiatives. So what would replace that? I'm just going to talk briefly again, because I do want you all to ask questions that, I haven't talked about the history, talked about the sort of long racist history of prisons. We can talk about prison labor. I'm very, very familiar with all this stuff. I've done a lot of writing on it myself. There's a sociologist named Patrick Sharkey who did a study of the role of local non-governmental organizations in reducing crime. And it turns out that that is actually a protective measure against crime and other disorder. It's not police coming in, it's people getting to know their neighbors, it's kids having a place to hang out, it's people sort of watching out for each other without the state sort of coming in there and doing it for them. And what is uncomfortable about that, I think, for folks in power or folks who are in a place like Santa Clara sometimes, is to think like, oh, actual power that gets devolved to somebody else means we are no longer the main characters in the story. And that is okay, because that is how we wish to be treated, right? And that's again why I started off by saying that the people who are in jail right now are people like you and me, right? All of the vividness with which you experience life is the same for somebody who's in jail. It's the same for their parents. It's the same for their siblings. It's the same for their children and friends. And so if you are thinking about what would work for you, and you don't think that that would work for someone else, I think you have to ask yourself, why is that not true, right? Why would that not be the case? Why is what works for you what wouldn't work for someone else? Does somebody else not love the way you do? Does someone else not have bad days the way you do? Someone else not get depressed the way you do, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's really my theory, is that there isn't a crime problem or a crime solution. There's really this question of who is a member of this community and what do we want to do to take care of each other? What we have right now is we have a war on crime, and we otherize people who are on the other side of the, the battleground or whatever we're going to call it. And I don't think that there's evidence that that works. And I think there's lots of evidence that other approaches. So I actually, that's just where I'm going to stop. But I did this so that we would not have like awkward silence time. I really want, to answer questions. You can ask me like, what about the children? Aren't there murderers in the world? I mean, all of those things that are legitimate questions that people have. And so I have answers for those. Not definitive answers, but I have ways in which I answer them. So fire away. Don't make me cold calling you. I am a law professor. I will do that. Or did I cover it? Yeah.
What's an alternative to prisons that you personally advocate for?
So the question was, what's an alternative to prisons that I personally advocate for? So when I have, so some of the people who I admire who are on the prison abolitionist side of things, I think that the framing is not, what they have said is, prison abolition is not about doing away with prisons. It's about building a world that does not need to rely on prisons. So I think the question depends on what crimes we are talking about, right? And I think we need to also push back on the kinds of crimes we're talking about. So you've heard about like porch pirates in San Francisco, right? And everybody's stealing their Amazon packages. But what's the #1 economic crime that took place in San Francisco Bay Area in the last 5 years? It's a big one. It's $400 million. Theranos, right? How many Amazon packages do you need to steal to amount to 1 Theranos? But how much time do we spend talking about the economic losses of that? So I think the Theranos question is different than the person stealing Amazon packaging question, right? I think that the people who are stealing Amazon packages, we can say they're bad people. I think they're probably just poor people. I think they're probably just hungry people. Right. And so I think the question we want to ask is what's going on with you? We don't actually spend a lot of time in that. Like people are sentenced to either more prison or less prison or more jail or less jail. We don't ask people why they did what they did and what they might need. Right. So I think that that's a basic question, is to try to figure out like, why is this particular person or why are these classes of people doing these things? Maybe it's substance use disorder. Okay. Right. And one of the things that I think is important in this discussion is you have people being sentenced to jail in Alameda County. I don't know as much in Santa Clara County because there are no mental health treatment beds. And judges are like, I wish I could get you treatment, but you can't, so I'm going to send you to jail, which is a very bad place to go if you have, mental health issues. So at the same time, I'm kind of skeptical of, sort of house arrest, because that ends up being, what you call net wipe. It's cheaper to incarcerate someone in their own home when they can't leave than it is in a jail. And it's also, creates some of the same problems, right? So I don't think I have easy answers, but I also don't, that's why I think it's important to say, but I'm not the outlier here, right? Our prison system, our prisons and jails are the outlier here, right? I just want to do what the rest of the world is doing. And you need to prove to me why what we're doing is okay. We're 3 times bigger prisons than we were under Ronald Reagan as governor. He decreased the prison population when he was governor, right? So we're just like, when you're way more conservative, like we're 3 times bigger than Reagan's prison system, that's not good. So that's not a good answer to the question, but I think it is schools. I think it's the chance for people to meet their needs in some kind of non-maladjusted way. There's a theory that I really like. It's called the Good Lives model. And it says everybody has the sort of same needs: physical safety, so food, clothing, and shelter. Everybody needs to belong. Everybody needs to matter, to feel like they understand. And so the theory, this is a criminological theory, obviously. The theory is that if you can't meet those needs through sort of pro-social mechanisms, you will find antisocial mechanisms to meet those. And what I like about that is that I actually do think that all of us do need the same things. I have yet to meet somebody who doesn't need love. And when somebody doesn't get love, sometimes they run for president and turn out to be like super hateful and mean, and it's still not enough for them, right? So, you know, thank you, Fred Trump, for like being so mean to your kid. Like, you know, we're reaping the benefit of that one, right? But it's true for all of us. So if we could figure that out, yeah, I do think we need to expand our social safety net. And I do think that we need to provide people with opportunities to lead meaningful lives. And I think if we don't, or if we tell them that they don't belong and that they're them and we're us, then I think that that creates these kinds of disjunctures where people don't, if we've told people they don't belong in society, and that's been a very clear message to poor people and people of color in this country, then how can we be surprised if they're not like super, you know, amped to join us? So it's not as simple as like, let's do this, this, and this, right? But it's a reorientation to say like, what problem are we trying to solve? I hope that's not too nebulous of an answer to your question. We'll get down to brass tacks in the next speakers, but these are all framework discussions. Is there another question? Yeah.
Okay, sure. So, as a mother of an adolescent, I'm certainly concerned. What then does the incarceration model do for pedophiles or, yeah, crimes against children?
Okay, so let's talk about pedophiles. So have you all heard the statistic that, who can tell me what a number they've heard about the recidivism statistic for pedophiles is? Anyone heard that? Anyone? Yeah, go ahead. Well, I know, but Paige, you're you, right? You know, so, right, in terms of, so when we talk about recidivism, right, for pedophiles, typically we can define it a number of ways. The number that gets bandied about is like 90%, right? But because of residency restrictions, right, they can't really live anywhere. So a lot of those crimes are crimes of homelessness, right? The recidivism rate for people then re-abusing children is much lower than the number that we see cited, right? And I think that that is a genuine problem, right? But we also then have to say, who is doing the offending? Okay, so you get Amber Alerts on your phone, as do I, right? The people, do you know how many stranger abductions there are in the United States every year? Less than 200. Most of the time, people who are abducted by a relative. Well, often it's a subject of custody. A lot of the times, right, cases of child sexual abuse are by relatives, by trusted friends, right, by coaches and teachers, right? So it is really like, that's a hugely important issue. It's a really important issue to be talking about at a Catholic university for sure, right? I mean, let's be real, you know, so, but again, how many is that, you know, so the question really is, are our jails now full of pedophiles? No, they're not, right? So that is a problem. What do we do about treatment of pedophilia? We don't actually have a lot of answers. We haven't looked a lot of places for that, you know, to find answers, because it's not as though somebody can come forward and say, I have these urges to have sex with children and feel like they can be treated or that we can treat them. Right now, I'm all about harm reduction. Like that's a horrible, horrible thing for children to be raped. Like there's no question about that. But I also think that it's interesting that that's the place that we tend to go, right? Is to the nuclear. Well, what if you let somebody out and blows up the entire world? Okay, but what about the other example of what if you arrest somebody for, you know, littering and they can't make bail and they spend, you know, a year in jail and they never get to complete their education and their mom and dad, like, you know, lose 5 years off their life because they're worried about them? What about Khalif Browder, who was, you know, killed himself after spending 2 years in Rikers Island, right, 17 years old? What about people who die in jail who have not been convicted of anything, right? So there are these other parade of horribles that we could think about. We have those that come readily to mind because those reinforce the dominant narrative of there are a bunch of really scary fucking people out there and we need to do something about them, whatever it takes. Let's just arm up everybody and let's round them up just to be on the safe side. Well, what we're saying, just to be on the safe side, right? I think we again need to think about who we're talking about, because the costs of over and under policing are always borne by somebody. They're just not usually borne by people who are in like a really nice patio walled garden on Santa Clara campus, right? So I mean, one of the other things to talk about, right, if we're actually talking about the sort of racial disparities, is that clearance rates for murders, and only when we're talking about clearance rates, that's arrest rates for murders in poorer neighborhoods and neighborhoods of color are less than 50% in most of the 75 major metropolitan areas in the United States. So people are hassled for piddling things and murders are not solved, right? So that's actually what, you know, a lot of the sort of scholarly folks who work on this issue will talk about, that it is an over and under policing issue, right? So I think the question really is, how do we solve this problem? We understand the problem, first of all. I wouldn't, you know, if I have 2 teenagers too, and I would say, oh, you know what? This person's spending an awful lot of time around my kid. I'm gonna sort of check into that, right? You know, I'm gonna ask my kids some sort of pointed questions about what goes on. And I've had these conversations with them. I'm gonna make sure that they understand that there's no shame in telling me something terrible happened, right? But those are just sort of common sense problems. The things that I would worry about are less sort of kids whose folks, you know, have like pretty orderly lives. Like the kids I think you need to worry about are kids who, you know, have parents who are working a lot because rents are really terrible and they're spending a whole lot of time unsupervised, right? But that is at root, I think, a poverty question rather than, but it's complicated. Anyone who's, I think, is that Christina? Yeah, so Christina's had me as a teacher. She knows that's the answer to everything. It's complicated, but it is, right? We can talk about how the ways in which it's complicated, but that is, you know, I think those are some of the issues we want to talk about. Do we have time for one more question? Yeah. Okay. No one over here? Yeah, okay.
I'm just thinking about the levers of change, like judges have options about sentencing, and a housing authority has, or school districts have options about funding or taxing. But a lot of these things have to go together, so is there any sense of how, what's the theory for change, where you begin to change, to eliminate the need?
Right. So that's a great question. And, you know, I wish that I had better answers about that. That's why I started off with us thinking about our connections to people who are in jail, right? Ruth Wilson Gilmore wrote a book called Golden Gulag. I wholeheartedly recommend it. It is like, it is to, you know, the new Jim Crow, as most people's opinion of the new Jim Crow is to the new Jim Crow. I mean, although you should read it if you haven't, but read the Golden Gulag first, because it's just awesome, okay? And, you know, she's a geographer and she talks about the sort of, you know, ways in which these are large systems that we are all parts of. And I think there tends to be a way in which we all kind of have tunnel vision about who is us and what is on my plate. And that goes for judges as well, right? In law school, when I went to law school and I graduated in 2006, I'm embarrassed, I'm old, whatever, you know, I was 36 when I graduated. You know, we had for the first time somebody who worked, who was a criminologist, who worked on prisons, late Joan Peter-Celia, one of my mentors. And it's incredible to me that that was so revolutionary to study. We were like, yep, up until the person in the robe says, boom, you're sentenced to prison for 40 years. And then we're like, done. When the majority of time that that person is spending in the system, and all of our theories of punishment and all of our theories about rehabilitation or retribution or incapacitation, that all happens in law schools. Like, we don't have to worry about that, right? So I think what you say to judges, right, is you would say, you know, I mean, I say this with some of my former students who are DAs, like, you know, I'm doing a bunch of misdemeanors and I'm sentenced them to 6 months in jail. I'm like, so you're following up after 6 months to make sure that that worked, right? And we'll laugh about that because that's such a ridiculous question, even though that's the most logical question of all, right? A judge will be like, well, I have to give you 5 years in order to teach you a lesson. Okay, so what, is that on your calendar in 5 years from now to see if that worked? And if it didn't work, are you gonna change what you do tomorrow? Right? Is there any kind of learning that goes on? And there isn't any, right? Judges will say what they know, and they know that pretrial release doesn't work. I think that's largely because when it fails, they see those same people in their courtrooms, and when it succeeds, they never see those people again, right? And so that is not because judges are particularly bad, it's because judges are human beings like all of us, And we have no idea what works if we never get any feedback about that. And so I do think that we need to think more systematically. And, you know, if you're at all interested, you can read some of my writing, like, you know, defunding state prisons is one of those things where I talk about, like, there is an ecosystem of people going through the system, and we should really treat that as one ecosystem. How somebody gets in, what happens when they get out, when they get back in, like what we failed at, what we can do. So that my theory of change really does start with the idea that everyone is a person, right? That there are psychopaths. I've been convinced of that by this research by this guy in New Mexico. So there are some sociopaths. Ted Bundy really was a sociopath. Everyone's like, wow, that guy's super, super charismatic and deadly. Like, that's true, right? I believe that. But he is like the pedophile, those are outliers. But that's what we talk about. So we think of them as being like in the fat part of the bell curve, right? Rather than as sort of outliers. I think that the majority of people in prisons and jails are people like you and me, whose circumstances were probably very different. Yeah.
If you don't mind, can I add a little to that? That I think one thing we're going to talk about as well is that one way to figure out how to put that together is to talk to the people in the bell curve, to the impact the people who have been in jail and their families, and ask them, what do they need?
Yeah.
What is working? What would work for them? How could we help them?
Right.
Or how could the community come together and help them? So that's a place to start, is to talk with them and to listen to them.
Yeah. Oh, understanding for sure. And I love my sort of prison law colleagues all around the country, because you can't just be theoretical if you're teaching the subject or writing about the subject. It's incredibly real. Like you can't wash your hands of it, right? One of my co-chair on the corrections committee, and God love her for this, like her main academic area is on solitary confinement. She goes into solitary confinement facilities and she studies them. And I will tell you that, speaking of broadening our horizon, she'll tell you, as she has told me, that when she does sort of intakes of the prisoners there for the PTSD scale, she also does intakes of the guards who work there on the PTSD scale, and they are fundamentally indistinguishable, right? So these are hellish places that, even when you are separated by all sorts of layers of security, we are social animals and we pick up on that. And when you see somebody despairing, right, like that actually eats away at you. The life expectancy of California prison guards after they retire, like the median length of time they live is about 5 years. That's not a great job, right? Now, I wish they had a different job for a number of reasons. I don't think that they deserve to make all the money that they make, et cetera, et cetera. There are problems with the prison guards union. But like I said, my world, I think my understanding of the world, the ability, like I can hold the fact that they have a terrible job in that they suffer from that, at the same time as I think that we should have dramatically smaller prison population, because I think that's true. And I don't think that it gets you anywhere to be like, they're all demons and stupid, because that's how we got into this mess in the first place. Yeah.
I don't want to keep anyone else from asking questions, but since you have the mic, and I think that you know better than we do the difference between jails and prisons.
Okay.
You want to see if somebody from the audience can answer that question while you're here? And if not,
Sure.
then you can.
All right. Who knows the answer? Not anybody who's a licensed attorney. Paige. Yeah. So that's part of it, right? So jails is where you await trial. It's where you go when you're arrested, although you can be, you know, there's sort of a variety of really confusing booking procedures, and you can be sort of booked and processed, you can be cited and released, et cetera. So that's one difference, is that there are some people in jail who are going to jail just to be, to await trial. Now, the research that I've done that focuses actually also on California prisons, right, is that so prisons were seen as like a big reform, because it used to be that people who were sentenced, and women and men and juveniles, everybody living together in the local jail, that we wanted to have a prison so that we could separate out people. And then we had all these other bizarre ideas about like solitary confinement will make you better when it actually makes you crazy. And we've known that for like almost 200 years. Seriously, like, Dickens wrote about that. He's like, whoa, people are going nuts. I mean, not, I'm paraphrasing here. People are going nuts in, Philadelphia, like the Walnut Creek City Jail. But now, but you can be sentenced to time in a jail. And it used to be that, the sort of rule of thumb, although this is always by statute. Christina's having flashbacks now, I'm sure, because that's my thing. But now you can do what's called county jail state prison. So that counts as a prior prison sentence when your next sentencing comes up, even though you're serving it in county jail. So there are people right now in the Santa Clara County Jail who are awaiting trial and they've been just arrested. Could be even just like drunk, picked up, nothing's ever gonna happen to them. There are people who are sentenced to some amount of time, 30 days, whatever, some minimal amount of time. There are now people who are in jail who are what are called non. So non-serious, non-violent, non-sex offenses. You serve that time in county jail state prison if it used to be a felony. By the way, serious offenses, my favorite serious offense, selling horse meat for human consumption, second offense. That is, you go to state prison for that one. Who will think of the horses? And then, finally, there are people who are going to come in to testify. So, if there's somebody who has to testify for trial, they're in prison, they might be coming in, right? And David Scarbeck, who I think is an alum of the undergrad, he's written some really interesting stuff about, the sort of relationships between prisons and jails, and, how prison gangs sort of operate in prisons and jails. So SKARBEK. So, but that's the difference between prisons and jails. Counties pay for prisons, states pay for prison. That's known as sort of the correctional free lunch. I happen to have written a ton about that. So if you're interested, there's a paper called Tough on Crime on the State's Dime, where I looked at crime rates and usage of state prison, right? Which is different than saying how many people do you send to state prison, because theoretically, it should be that we use prison for violent crimes. So when you do that, right? So Jeff Rosen, who's up for re-election now, I am not a fan, but he's better than the person before him, but ever upward, right? We incarcerate per capita at a lower rate than the rest of the state. But relative to our violent crime rate, we incarcerate above the rest of the state, right? So it's not enough to say people, it's like, what is the need for prison? I think I think we could all agree that if there is a need for prison, it's violent crime. So Santa Clara County, but also, San Bernardino County, I know you're all stunned, right? Other counties use prison at a rate that is disproportionate to the amount of violent crime they have. And my theory about that is that they were doing that because the state will pay for that, right? Whereas counties have to pay for social services, counties have to pay for drug treatment, counties have to pay for mental health treatment, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the kinds of like really boring but important budgetary details. You're like, why is that? Why are we subsidizing admissions to state prisons? Why will the state pay for unlimited prison usage? I mean, this has all changed as a result of this thing called AB 109, but why is it that in most states, we'll pay for whatever prisoners you want to send? Is that because we think it's good? Is that because we think it's necessary? It's not. It's not related to crime rates. Same crime rate in Alameda County and San Bernardino County in the period that I studied, which is 1990 to 2000. Same crime rate, same population, same property crime rate, same ages of people in prime crime years, et cetera, et cetera. Everything is the same except for San Bernardino sent twice as many people to prison every year as Alameda County did. 2 times, right? This is one, and they had between 3.5 and 5 times as many people in prison, because when they sent them to prison, they sent them for longer. And you can't explain that by looking at the types of offenses. I have to conclude that San Bernardino was like, well, we're not a welfare state, but that's why I called it the obnoxious title, which is tough on crime in the state's dime. So San Bernardino, like, you're the biggest, welfare users in terms of using prison that there is in the state of California. That did not go over well. It's unusual for a draft article to be, on the radar of a sheriff of a county, but I was traveling, I was like, oh, wow, somebody's teeing off on me and calling me a pointed headed intellectual. So San Bernardino represent, it's pretty interesting. Yeah. And then I mean, I'm not keeping time, so that's true. It's all,
Yes,
okay, yeah.
So what is the reality of, or the possibility if the defunding of the prison system were to happen, to reallocate those funds into the safety nets that I certainly believe need to happen?
What, you think people need to eat? Wow.
Yeah.
No, I'm
right,
kidding.
right.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it's two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, of
right?
course.
You do one, then you gotta do the
Yeah,
other.
yeah,
and
yeah.
That's the reality of
Right.
actually making that.
So here's what I want to say, that, so there was something called the Justice Reinvestment Initiative that was supposed to address some of these problems. And it said, hey, as states reduce their prison populations, they will then move the money to social programs. The mistake in most of the sort of evaluation research is that the people who controlled the money were law enforcement. And they did not give that up, right? So they ended up doing, again, we're back to net widening, right? So prisons were more efficient, or they upgraded their prison systems. You've got to take the money away from jail. You've got to take the money away from the district attorney. I don't care what Jeff Rosen says about, like, well, we're going to divert, we're going to have drug court or whatever. Let's have drug treatment be outside of the criminal legal system entirely, right? Because I don't think, and in fact, there's a great paper called Counterindicated Drug Courts by a guy named Josh Bowers. The people who benefit from drug court are the people who are not addicted. They're actually the dealers, because we expect when you're trying to kick something, especially something that's really difficult to kick, like heroin or methamphetamine, you're going to fail multiple times. The success metric is not, did you ever do it again, but how long were you sober before you relapsed, right? But drug courts are like, you failed, bye, off to prison for you, and you get more time added because, you know, you lied to us, or whatever our theory is about that. So I think we need to take that stuff entirely outside the prison system, outside the jail system, outside of the DAs, outside of police officers. And I'm trying to do that here with campus safety. I think that campus safety involves mental health. I don't think our campus safety officers are trained at doing that. In fact, I know they're not, you know, so I want us to talk about, like, what do we mean when we talk about safety? Hey, to me, safety means 6 million children in poverty in the United States. Are you kidding me? That's not safe. I don't care if your bike is stolen. I don't care if your Tesla gets keyed. I don't care if your really fancy house in Los Altos Hills gets broken into. I hope it doesn't, but that is not my priority, right? Or your second house or your third house or whatever, right? Like, those are not optional to me, right? And I don't want the DA being like, well, here's our child poverty initiative that we can think about, not having ever been trained about that, thinking only about how do we do jails? And that's this issue with the jail. You took away our jail, now you need to give this back to jail. It's like, no, we took our money back, and now you need to ask us politely for it and tell us why we should be spending $500 million on a freaking jail that's not just going to cost $500 million. It's all the harm and suffering that is paid by everybody who goes into it. It's all of their family members. That's why, again, I started with community, right? Like, those are all unaccounted for costs, right? So take that out of those people's hands and give it to people who aren't at the table right now, right? And that's the least we could do, right? I feel like, but anyway, so, okay, I'll really stop there, but thanks everybody. And there's more to go, but thanks for letting me have this part.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I think I can speak for everyone in that. We could soak it up all night long. So thank you for that. And I'm sure there could have been more questions, but we're gonna shift into the next part of our evening. I just want to comment, I find it, I can imagine for our virtual users that, David, you've seemed somewhat like, you know, we have like the burning bush here speaking for our virtual speakers who can't see the person standing up here. So it was an actual person. It wasn't a burning bush who's speaking to you all. But thank you so much, David. As we, you know, feel free, want to reiterate for those who trickled in as we started, there is a table over here with some water, tea, other snacks. Feel free at any point to get up and help yourselves. If you do need the restroom, just around the corner, push really hard on the door, and yeah, make your way back. So as we transition to the next part of our evening, I'd like to welcome up our showing up for racial justice organizers, our SURJ organizers.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having us here tonight. We're just super excited to be here with you. And thank you to Professor Ball for sharing your wisdom. Really appreciate being able to take all of that in. So I'll start by just introducing who we are. My name is Lori.
And I'm Tila.
So Tila and I are a part of Showing Up for Racial Justice at Sacred Heart. And you can go to the next slide. We live here in Santa Clara County. Tila lives in Mountain View. I live just down the street in San Jose. And we are a part of the SURJ chapter that's out of Sacred Heart Community Service. And Showing Up for Racial Justice is an organization where we organize, mobilize, and educate white folks and other folks with privilege for racial justice. So that's who we are, and you can go to the next slide. We do our work in partnership with a lot of people and a lot of different organizations. And the most important thing that I want to note is that SURJ works under the leadership of people that we call our accountability partners. Our accountability partners are organizations, local organizations that are led by Black, Latinx, and Indigenous leaders, and we follow their lead and show up in the ways that they ask us to. And this current campaign that we're going to talk about tonight is under the direction and led by Silicon Valley Debug, who you can see on the slide, and we'll talk a little bit more about Debug in just a few minutes. So I kind of want to let us all take a deep breath. We've taken in a lot tonight. Some of you, I'm kind of wondering kind of who we have in the room, if people have heard a lot of this information about incarceration before. Maybe what I'll ask is there anyone that this is the first time you're hearing this? And that's okay. Yeah, okay. So, you know, no matter where we're at, we're all still learning. So just welcome. And we can go to the next slide. So here's our agenda for the next 30 minutes. We're gonna talk about what is the Care First Jail Last campaign. We're gonna talk specifically about incarceration in Santa Clara County. So what's really happening in our jails. We're gonna talk about envisioning a better future. And then we're gonna end with an invitation to take action locally and immediately. And that's what we're really excited about, and really excited that you're here. And we want to invite you to participate with us in that. We can go to the next slide. So can you go to the next slide, Drew? Oh, you did. Oh, sorry. We're here. Okay. So just some invitations to consider for the next 30 minutes. It's okay to make mistakes. We are all learning, okay? And also I want us to remember that we don't need to have all the answers. Also, please ask if you have questions. So I will say we've got a lot to talk about in 30 minutes, but I'm happy to stay after and answer questions or try to send you to people who do have answers if I don't. And then finally, please give yourself space to imagine. And we can go to the next slide.
All right, thank you, Lori, for getting us started. So this is why we are here and why we need you. The Cares First, Jails Last campaign. And right now, this is the best chance in decades to move the county away from incarceration and into community-based solutions. You can go to the next slide. So this is sort of what we're talking about. What are the next steps? What can we do? This is one thing that, that we can do. But here's a little bit of setting it up for you so you understand what we're asking for and where we started with. So in
On June 23rd in 2020, the County Board of Supervisors adopted the Black Lives Matter resolution to eliminate their goal. They adopted this on their own, right? The Board of Supervisors are the governing board of the county. So sort of like the school board or whatever, right? They are making decisions about the county. And they adopted this resolution, Black Lives Matter resolution, and the goal was to help eliminate systemic and institutional racial inequities in the county. And let me see, I've got better wording here. Hold on just one second. So then in November 2020, the Santa Clara Board, the Board of Supervisors, in the wake of racial justice uprisings, as we all know what was going on that summer, they voted to temporarily pause the building of a new jail, which is with a price tag of $390 million. And while it was temporarily paused, to solicit community input on alternatives to building this new jail. So from July to October 2021, input was collected from general community and impacted families through focus groups inside the jails, Zoom and in-person forums and surveys, both general community and also inside the jails focus groups with incarcerated individuals and system impacted families. So one thing that came out of all of these community input sessions, not just the system impacted families, but also the general surveys that they did, is that there was overwhelming support for funding alternatives instead of a jail. So as Lori talked about, the Care for Jails Last Coalition is led by Silicon Valley Debug, and Silicon Valley Debug is the, it's a local leader in grassroots work to address mass incarceration in Santa Clara County, and many Debug organizers are system impacted family members. So the focus of this coalition was to research, learn, organize, teach, inform the community, and importantly, to hold the Board of Supervisors accountable to their commitments to racial justice and to prioritizing community and especially system impacted voices. These are the guiding principles for the coalition, that we are stopping the jail. That's what we are here to ask you guys to help us out with today. And we'll talk more about that. And priority number 2, we need to create non-carceral alternatives to address the root issues that fuel incarceration, just like we were talking about earlier. That's really where the focus should be. And number 3, in part of that, somebody was asking, how do we start? Where do we start? A good place to start is to center the experiences and leadership of those who are incarcerated, formerly incarcerated, their families and loved ones. They're the ones that know what could help them to get out of the situations that they're in, to get into better situations, to stop that from happening for generations to come. Okay, so the coalition is calling for reallocation of funds to instead of building the jail, to vitally underfunded community-based services that address the root issues that fuel incarceration. Social services, mental health and wellness services, supportive housing and mental health crisis support. I could add to that, food insecurity support, all sorts of things like we talked about earlier, housing, shelter. Those are important things to first address. And the coalition is holding the county accountable first for making sure that the community input was also centered the voices of system impacted people, but also that now that they have all of that data, all of that input, to make sure that they honor that process and take those voices really into consideration in their decision making. And yes. So on Tuesday, next Tuesday, coming up very quickly, the Board of Supervisors will hear a report from city staffers, which collected all of that information from the organizations that did the community input, and they will report that back to the Board of Supervisors, and they will likely vote on whether to permanently halt the building of this new jail instead of just the temporary halt that is on now. That is the next decision that's coming up, and this is, next slide, please. So we need to hold the county accountable to their commitment to dismantling systems of oppression by permanently halting construction of a new jail. Okay, so that is our ask, and Lori's going to tell you more about the jails in Santa Clara County.
Okay, so zeroing in on our local county carceral system. In the jails in Santa Clara County, we have the main jail complex. We have Elmwood Correctional Facility and Juvenile Hall Detention Center and James Ranch. I do know that recently there have been a lot of changes with juvenile justice. We're focusing tonight on the adult population in our jails. And so that's who this graph is about, is the total adult population in Santa Clara County jails. These numbers are as of just a few days ago, and you can find this on the county website any given day. The total number of people in our county jails of adults are 2,520. And if you look over at the little purple box, 297 only have already been sentenced. Okay, so those are the people who have been sentenced. 2,223 people, or about 88% of people in our county jails, are awaiting trial. They've been arrested, but they have not been convicted and sentenced of a crime. And currently, they can wait in jail about 9 months before their case comes to trial. So as we talked about earlier, we think about who these people are, and are they not only missing work, but probably losing their job if they're in jail for 9 months, ripped out of their communities and from their families, possibly losing housing if they can't work for all those months, right? I mean, not getting to pick up their kids from school, and we can go on. So let's think about this. These are people who are legally innocent until proven guilty. Now we're going to move over to look at what's really going on from a racial justice standpoint in our county jail. The disproportionality in jail bookings in Santa Clara County, this is from 2019, this was compiled by the Haywood Burns Institute. The adult population in Santa Clara County is the circle on the left. And in Santa Clara County, whereas 3% of our adult population are Black adults, they make up 11% of adults booked into our jail. Whereas the general adult population in Santa Clara County is 22% Latino. Latino adults make up 51% of adults booked into our county jails. Next slide. And this slide shows disparities in jail bookings. And we can see that the disparity increased from 2016 to 2019. So while booking rates for white adults decreased, booking rates for Black adults increased. And then this is our disparity in booking. We can see that for 2019, the most recent year on the slide, for every one white adult booked into jail, we have 6.5 Black adults and 3 Latino adults booked into our county jails. Okay, that's a lot to take in. So we have a racist criminal justice system here in our county. We're going to look a little bit now about recent history in our county jail. In 2015, many of you may know this, 3 correctional officers murdered Michael Tyree in his jail cell. And I'm going to move through this quickly, and so bear with me. I know these are, I don't mean to make light of all of this important history, but just out of time. So in 2016, there were hunger strikes within the jails to protest continued abusive and inhumane treatment. At the same time, I'm going to add a little bit more. I think that didn't get into this slide deck. That's okay, but I'm going to tell you what else happened. Also in 2016, there was a Blue Ribbon Commission here in Santa Clara County, and that commission agreed that yes, the jail conditions are inhumane. There was also a lawsuit filed against the county related to the Americans with Disabilities Act. So there were ADA violations in the county jails. So in 2018, the Board of Supervisors decided that the best way to get out from under those consent decrees that they had to comply with, the ADA consent decrees, they decided that the best way to do that was that they needed to build a state-of-the-art jail to improve conditions. While there are other ways to comply with consent decrees. And then in 2020, the county demolished Main Jail South in preparation to build a new jail. So our main jail complex that I mentioned, we have Main Jail North, which is still standing. You can see it from 87. It's right downtown. Main Jail South was demolished in order to have the space to build this new state-of-the-art jail. The other things that happened in 2020 were that COVID ravaged our jails. And it's still in the news. In fact, today I just read in the Merc that there's a new resurgence of COVID cases in our jails. And we know that after the murder of George Floyd, here locally and across the country, uprisings focused in on the policing and incarceration of our Black and Brown communities, and how our Black and Brown communities are being hurt. So here's that's just in our county jails here. You can go to the next slide. And now we're going to talk a little bit about costs. So we talked about how this new jail that the Board of Supervisors are considering is, whoops, this is you, Tila. It has a price tag of $390 million. But that is irrespective of the day-to-day cost of running a jail. So Tila's going to give us that info.
No problem. And I just wanted to add that we talked earlier about how bonds are raised, right? So this 390 million price tag is funded by bonds. So it's not a big pot of money that's sitting somewhere that they can just hand out to everybody. But again, they're considering it infrastructure, building a new jail, and they're going to take out bonds to fund, or the idea was to take out bonds, which is not going to happen now because we're going to stop the building of the jail. But that was the plan, was to have infrastructure money to build that. But irrespective, as Lori just said, irrespective of that, there is also a cost of keeping these especially these pre-trial people in jail. There's operating costs for keeping a human being in jail in Santa Clara County. So this is the approved budget, the 2021-2022 Santa Clara County budget for jail operations, including salaries, benefits, services. That's $247 million. And we have, as we saw earlier, about approximate daily average population in the jails is about 2,400 people. So that is, if you do the math, a roughly $100,000 per person per year that we are spending to keep people in there, away from their community, pre-trial, before they are even sentenced. So how can we imagine a future where this doesn't happen? Can we imagine community care we could invest in that money? So next slide. I want to invite you for a moment. We're going to do a little, since we're at a university, we might as well do some interaction. Like, you just think for a minute, or not quite a minute, think for less than a minute about if you could decide how to spend $100,000 to help keep our community safe, what would you do? So let's think for a minute and then share with somebody sitting near you. Or we can, since it's a small, we can also, if people want to share, how would you spend $100,000 to help keep people safe? Yeah. After school programs, keep kids at school, keep kids learning, keep kids in a safe environment instead of going home to empty houses. Yes, or dangerous neighborhoods. Yes, that's a great one. Affordable housing, that's right. Give people subsidized housing so that people have a place to live and are not on the streets or in RVs. In Mountain View, there's a lot of people living in RVs. Yes. Accessible mental. I heard a story from one of our organizers said that right now, oh no, that was drug rehabilitation. I'll tell you that story, but yes, accessible. Right now, there are no beds.
I'll second that. We just said accessible mental. health.
Accessible
I think
mental
that
health.
It's accessible like AA is accessible. It's a community supported environment and everyone's taking responsibility for going there.
So more support for things like that. Yes. Anybody else? One more. Yes. Say that again. Job training, that's right. Giving people who maybe didn't do great at school, don't know what they want to do, some options of having centers where they can go to find out what are their options. McDonald's is not the only option for people who don't go to college, right? So yes, those are all great things. Next slide, please. So here are some ideas with some numbers that we came up with in black and white here for you to see. So imagine if the county reinvested that $100,000 per year per person in real community safety. Let me see if I did a little copy. So if you click again, yes. We could offer a 28-day residential addiction treatment program to 5 people with that money. We could rent a 1-bedroom apartment for 1 year for 3 people for the amount of money it takes to keep 1 person in jail for a year. We could provide twice-a-week therapy sessions for a year for 5 people. 5 people. Or we could send, yeah, okay, so sorry, I want to go back to that one point. I knew there was something important I want to say. The mental health services like you were talking about. According to a report to the Santa Clara County Civil Grand Jury, approximately 45 to 50% of total inmates and up to 80% of female inmates in the jails, Santa Clara County jails, have mental health issues. So if somebody had the option to have twice-a-week mental health services, this would make a huge difference. This would make a huge difference. So, and the last one was we could send, let's see, 5 people. 10, sorry. 14 people. I knew I should know this. I wrote it down. Here we go. We could pay 1 year of tuition at San Jose State University for 12 people with the money that it costs to keep 1 person in jail for 1 year. So these are, this is part of our ask. The coalition is asking is to don't build a new jail because we all know if you build it, they will fill it, right? If it's there, it will get full. And so how could we take, we're not just talking about the cost of building the new jail, which they will tell you, the Board of Supervisors will tell you is not a pot of money sitting in a corner. But we take a look at the operating cost of keeping these people. All these other things would help to keep those people out of jail. We would not have to spend this $100,000 per person per year if there were more resources. Okay, sorry. So Lori's next. Part of our imagining.
All right, I appreciate all the ideas that everyone came up with. So we've already been doing some imagining here. I was just wondering, any of you in the front row, can read this if it's large enough? And would somebody be willing to just pick one of these and read this for us out loud? Anyone? Thank you.
Okay, I'll take the middle one.
Great.
You are experiencing a mental health crisis and afraid. Imagine you call 311 and a first responder trained in mental health comes to your door. 1 hour later, you are in a safe place with your consent with plans for follow-up care. Isn't that public safety?
Thank you. Thanks for reading that. There are many new ways to envision and create public safety. We can go to the next slide. We don't have all the answers yet. We just have to do better than the current system that we have. And I think it's pretty darn clear from our time tonight that the current system that we have is an incredible mess. All we have to do is better than that, right? Okay, next slide. But what can I do? Tila's gonna help us.
Okay. All right. So what can we do? We're getting to the action now. So what you can do today, tonight, right now, I won't, if you pull out your phone right now, I will not be offended. You can email or call your supervisor about investing in resources instead of incarceration right now, tonight. On your flyer that you got, there is information about how to do that. The small sheet has information about who to contact, how to look up your supervisor, and also some talking points. So I want to talk just quickly because we're running out of time. So one important thing, if you are interested in learning more and being more involved, is to sign up on, we have a paper sign up sheet here. And so there is some help. I just want to say that you come up with a story of why are you interested in this campaign, but that can be very simple. Like, I came to this talk tonight and now I am upset about what I learned and I need you to do something about it as my elected officials. That can be the story of you. Maybe you know somebody who is in jail, or you have some other history, or you work in that field and you have some experiences you can bring to it, but it doesn't have to be an earth-shattering connection. You can just be wanting to do right, wanting our county to do right. That is enough. And the story of us, why does this issue matter to the broader community? The story of now, what specific action we want them to do. Support community-based alternatives to pretrial detention instead of building a new jail. That is exactly what we want them to do. All of this information, we have helped you with that. SURJ has, and Debug have talking points for that. So you don't have to write this all from scratch. It's not hard. We've got resources for you. So next slide, please. We're going to go really quickly now, so we have time for questions.
Yeah, so please sign up on the sign up sheet, because if you give us your information, you will be getting from us also the link to show up at the Board of Supervisors meeting, to get the link to find talking points that we've come up with that you can use along with your own. All of that. So please, if that sheet's going around, please sign that. I just want to give you a little bit of information in case you don't know, who are your Board of Supervisors. So Santa Clara County is divided into 5 districts based on population, and these are our county supervisors. So there's a supervisor for each district. If you live near or in the Santa Clara University area, Susan Ellenberg is your county supervisor. But you can also look this up online and find that information. So the thing is that all the supervisors are also working together for the county. So we can email all of them. We should email all of them. And we want to hold all of them accountable. So here's the deal. Can you go to the next slide? We don't get to vote, right, on whether we want a new jail or not. We have 5 people that get to vote for that, okay? We don't need all 5 people to vote to stop the jail. We only need 3. We just need 3 votes, okay? We can do this. We can do this. What do we have though as a community? How do we shift that power from these 5 people? We do it by everyone showing up and everyone lending their voice. This is a core principle of organizing. We are shifting the power from the few to the many. And we do that by doing it together, okay? It's not just 1 or 2 of us showing up. It's all of us gathering together and saying, this is what we want you to do. This is part of living in a democracy, is that we get to do this, okay? This is exciting. So we need your voice. We need all of this together. And Tila's going to give us the quick info about all the options that you have.
Right, so what can you do? You can talk to people in your lives about this issue and invite them to speak on the next Tuesday. What we forgot to mention is that it's a Zoom meeting, so you can do it from the pizza, with Pizza My Heart. You can do it from your dorm room. You can do it from wherever you are, and you can have your camera off when you speak. They don't have to see you. You can have your script right there in front of you to read. It's Zoom actually in this case has made it easier for more people to show up. If you're interested, you can attend a workshop also on Zoom on how to write public comment this Sunday. You'll get more information if you put your name down there. You can invite others to attend with you. You can join our list, which is being on the sign up sheet. You can host or get some friends to come and watch and all give testimony together on the 16th to hold each other accountable. And of course, the big ask, as has already been said there, is we're asking people to testify. If you can't be there in person, you don't feel comfortable with that, writing a letter to that day, there's also information about how to do that, write written comment. The handout has links and more information. The handout also has some more history of this campaign, which we presented today. Next slide. So what we want to do is, since we don't have much time, we're not going to share anything out, but just really think right now for just 10 seconds. What can you commit to do? Maybe you're not so into organizing yet. Maybe you just can talk with some people you know about this. Like, here's what I heard about tonight. And what do you think? Isn't this something we should be concerned about as a community, part of this community? You can learn more about SURJ and debug. You can go to the website. You can sign up for the list. You can go to the comment writing workshop. You can call your supervisor, and you can come and speak with us at the Board of Supervisors meeting on November 16th. And any questions, what support would you need to follow through? We are there. We are happy to help you. We have lots of people who are so pumped up about this thing. I don't know if you've seen, there's a press release went out today. Should I just mention that quickly? SURJ has been, I think it went out today, right? That has been projecting on buildings in the county about this campaign. So maybe somebody said, whoa, I heard this weird thing about like care and no jails. Like, what was that? Now you can tell them some more information. Have a look out for that. In the next week, it will be projected around, I'm not sure everywhere, but around San Jose. So next slide. Do you want to, we're going to do this.
Sure.
Yeah.
Just going to emphasize again, the Board of Supervisors meeting is virtual, and there's not even an option to have your camera on. The way it works is that when you join the meeting, you will see the supervisors. They are the only people that we see on the screen. The public has, like, there's no cameras on any public person. You enter the meeting with your name and probably your email address. And what happens is, when the agenda item comes up that you want to speak on, and we will inform you, because we'll get the agenda the day before the Board of Supervisors meeting. So we don't even know what time of day it's going to be yet. And that's why we're asking you, please sign up so we can let you know what time of day it is that this agenda item is going to come up on Tuesday. And when that agenda item comes up, there's a little raise hand button. You raise your hand, and they'll go through the list of people, and they'll call your name and say, I'm unmuting you. You now have, it'll probably be 1 minute to speak, but if there's a lot of us, which I hope so, you'll have 30 seconds. Okay, so we're gonna need to also really make our public comments down to 30 seconds. And I just wanna share an example of something that recently happened where community organizing made a difference. Recently, you may have heard that the Board of Supervisors voted to close the Reed Hillview Airport in East San Jose that has been leaking lead into that community for years, okay? They weren't really planning to vote that way. But that day, at that Board of Supervisors meeting, At midnight, there were still 300 community members on the call. Okay, that is why the Board of Supervisors voted to close the Reed Hillview Airport. That is community organizing. And we can do that. We can do that with this jail. Part of what we do in SURJ is at all of our meetings, we pass what we call the Tupperware of Justice. And we're going to pass it tonight. And really the reason that I want to do this is that one of our core values in SURJ is that we believe in a reparations model of money going from those who have to those who historically have been oppressed and disadvantaged in this way. So 25% of our monthly recurring donations that SURJ members give go to our organizing costs with SURJ. The rest, the 75%, is split evenly between Silicon Valley Debug, the Rapid Response Network Family Support Fund, and the Amamutsan Land Trust. So you can also donate by going to the SURJ website, but Linda's going to pass the Tupperware of Justice around so you can see what it looks like. If you have something that you want to donate, great. If not, no problem. Next slide, please. So we are at our closing, and Tila and I were willing to hang around. We know we're at time, but we're willing to hang around and answer questions that you might have. But for our closing, we'd like each person to finish the following sentence. After this, I can now imagine blank. And I would love some people just to call out what you can imagine. Decarcerating Santa Clara, yes. Abolishing jails and prisons, yes. Social programs funded. Humanizing the justice involved folks in our county and our country. Thank you. Linda.
Mental health care for all.
Mental health care for all.
More food.
More food.
More food support.
Support. Yes, yes. Thank you. So thank you for being here. We really appreciate the invitation from Drew and Santa Clara University to join you tonight. And we hope to see you, not see you, hear you on the Board of Supervisors meeting on Tuesday. Thank you.
Thank you so much to both of you, Lori and Tila, for organizing us. So our final part of the evening, I'd like to, because we're focusing on public safety locally in our wider SCU community, it begs the question about what's going on with our student organizers talking about safety on our campus. So I'd love to invite Angel and Alexis, just Angel, to fill us in on the organizing that student leaders have been doing on our campus.
Apologies. I was supposed to come with like a bunch of people, but they all just could not make it. It's week 8. I apologize. But hello, my name is Angel. I'm currently acting as student body vice president, and I'm also part of the Inclusive Excellence Student Advisory Council. And I wanted to sort of extend this conversation to student safety on our campus and just what a reimagination of campus safety really looks like. And after hearing all of these really thought-provoking ideas about the reimagination of safety within Santa Clara County, we'd like to take this opportunity to invite you to consider student safety on our very own campus. For years, we've heard testimonies from Black students and students of color experiencing feelings of surveillance, over-policing, being targeted, vulnerability, and distrust in our campus safety services. Just last year, we heard about the incident with Dr. Morgan, where she felt profiled and she was followed and stalked on her very own campus where she taught. And we had an entire external audit of our campus safety services that confirmed that there was racial bias within our campus safety services program, as well as the results of the Title IX audit that was actually investigating the incident, which despite finding that the campus safety officers who were involved in the incident guilty of racial animus and bias, allowed for them to be returned on, or they were allowed to return to their jobs, and there was no termination suggestion following that. Black students on this campus are fraught with the burden of constantly and defensively worrying about their own well-being, knowing fully well that their campus safety services does not serve them. The goals of a truly reimagined CSS department ought to be student safety and well-being. Our vision of student safety does not include a reliance on punitive measures, the unnecessary use of force, the presumption of guilt, or any students in handcuffs. Our vision of student safety is one that embodies a community of care, where crimes against people, especially those from marginalized groups, are more heinous than crimes against property, where students and community members are trusted with the responsibility to lead, where sexual violence and substance abuse prevention are prioritized over reactionary measures, where adequate and robust resources are provided to care for the mental health of all, and especially BIPOC students, where restorative justice and faith in the community is central to the university's operations, and where Black students can feel safe on campus. This past year, we formed a coalition of students from the Multicultural Center, Associated Student Government, Black Business Association, and Igwe Buike, which is SCU's Black Student Union, to address these disparities in our own reimagination of campus safety. Our focus area is centered on the creation of accountability measures, the standardized and public collection of data, and a commitment to policy transparency. We recognize the need for concrete mechanisms that enable students to easily report their interactions with campus safety officers and are working to create methods so that those reports are actually taken seriously, meaning actions are taken to hold officers accountable. We've also been working on collecting and condensing data regarding all things DEI and campus safety and ensuring that this information is made public and accessible for everyone. Lastly, we're working hard to ensure that all policies regarding the interactions between students and campus safety officers are made fully transparent to the public, given that they're currently only accessible in a physical copy in one location on campus. At the beginning of this year, we co-signed an open letter to the university administration calling for urgency in addressing this issue and the needs of BIPOC students on campus. We've since had multiple conversations with acting president Lisa Kloppenberg and the VP of Student Life, Jeannie Rosenberger, and the VP of DEI, Shay Duncan-Smith, and are working towards creating projects to address our 3 focus areas. And we're beginning to see some concrete change on campus. We invite you, I invite you to think about these questions as we leave this presentation today. What ought student safety look like on our campus? And if the goals of campus safety services are truly aligned with student safety, why do they play such a significant role in the punitive actions taken against students? What is the need for a CSS department in times of emergency and crisis when our campus literally resides 0.2 miles from Santa Clara County Police Department? How can we say that CSS is aligned with campus safety and student safety when Black students feel unsafe by their very presence? What accountability measures can we come up with to ensure that these atrocious acts committed against students, faculty, staff, and community members never happen again? What can we do to ensure that a community of care that truly embodies the mission and Jesuit mission of Cura Personalis, care for the entire person, is actually committed to here at Santa Clara University? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angel, and your peers you're speaking on behalf of. So yeah, we're a little over time, but I found this very enriching. I hope that was the case for you all as well. It was a real pleasure to be able to work with everyone involved who's here. So thank you to SURJ, thank you to Sacred Heart, and the campus ministry and diversity equity office for diversity equity inclusion. So everybody who promoted. This is recorded, so we'll send out emails, follow-up emails with the links for Tuesday's meeting, with the recording, so you can share it with people, and people can do 1.5 or 2 times speed on YouTube or something like that, right? But thank you so much for being here. Take some snacks on your way out, and yeah, I believe our SURJ folks are gonna mingle if you have any questions. So thank you again.